Welcome to the FiPL Farm Diaries, brought to you by the Yorkshire Dales National Park Authority. FiPL stands for Farming in Protected Landscapes, a programme funded by Defra that helps farmers and land managers in England's national parks and national landscapes access funding for projects supporting climate, nature, people and place. In each episode, we'll dig into a particular part of a project that's received FiPL funding. And while we focus on one theme at a time, every story is part of a much bigger picture, showing how these projects and people are working together to shape the future of farming in the Yorkshire Dales landscape. Join us as we meet the people making a difference and discover how farming in protected landscapes is delivering for the Dales, one story at a time.
Hello and welcome to the 6th episode of the FiPL Farm Diaries. This episode is all about farmer-led conservation, so we're going to be speaking to some farmers that are at the forefront of protecting some of the Dales' most iconic species and also land restoration. The first farmer that we're going to speak to is Lee Weston, and she's going to be talking to us about the Malhamdale Curlew project.
I'm Lee Weston and I farm with my partner Neil Heseltine at Hilltop Farm in Malham.
So Lee, this episode is all about farmer-led conservation. So just give us a bit of background to what you applied for a FiPL grant for. What is it that you were looking to do?
We applied for a grant, not as the farm, though we have had other FiPL applications for the farm for things like meadow restoration. In this instance, we applied as the Malhamdale Curlew project for funding to help us bring together a project that would survey the curlews in Malhamdale and work out where they were, what they were doing and how successful they were raising chicks.
Mm-hmm. So this, just give us a bit more backstory then, Lee, because you've always had an interest in curlews and you came across some Dales that was doing something similar in Clapham. Just give us a bit more sort of background to, I suppose, what made you want to do it?
So we have curlews on the farm. We're very lucky in that I was always very interested in them. When I was out on the farm, through the meadows, especially summer, they'd be absolutely mobbing you and going crazy, being really protective of nests. I never really knew where the nests were. And I just thought, these birds are absolutely amazing. I'm originally from the northeast, from Newcastle, and grew up near the coast. And I probably knew them very much as a coastal bird. Didn't really know they had this double life inland, in the uplands, and in the Dales. So then thought, these birds are just really special. And I saw someone I knew sharing something on Facebook to start the Clapham Curlew group. And they asked anybody who was interested in curlews to go along to a meeting at Clapham, I think it was at the Village Hall. I went to that and it really opened my mind as to what might be possible. And that was the early days of Clapham setting up their group. Going back to 2018, I think, I went to see Mary Colwell speak, and she'd written her book, Curlew Moon, which was all about how much trouble curlews were in and how they were really, really struggling to breed. And she did this really inspirational thing where she walked right across all of the UK nations, finding out what was going wrong in the landscape and what the pressures were for the curlew. As soon as I saw Mary speak, I realised how complacent we were on our own farm about where those birds were at. And that actually we maybe wouldn't see them forever here if we didn't act or tried to do the things that we could do to try and help them, whatever that might be, and that, whether that be physical or just talking to people or, changes in farm practice. We had to do what we could do.
I was saying to you before we press record, like the sound of the curlew for me, I spent a lot of time not living in the Dales and we've come back, but that is the sound of home for me. That is the sound of the Dales. So it would be such a shame, wouldn't it, to lose them from the landscape. And you do still hear them, but you're absolutely right. How much longer for? And this isn't all about farming practices. That's not the only pressure on curlews, but it is part of it, isn't it? So tell us what your FiPL money paid for. What did that grant actually cover?
So our FiPL money paid for a So for actual wildlife cameras, for nest monitoring, nest activity, we didn't routinely go out looking for nests, but if we came across them, to be able to put a camera on there and see maybe what some of the pressures were for the birds when they were actually on the nest. So we got 4 cameras. And then also the main bulk of the money was to pay a consultant ornithologist to basically streamline our process as a curlew group, as the Malhamdale Curlew Project, and allow a professional to collect all of our data, look at it, and write a meaningful report. So we, as the group and the farms that we survey on, could actually see what was happening on the ground in Malhamdale.
Amazing. So that made what was a bit of an interest project into something really tangible and scientific, like, you know, proper data that you can use.
Yeah.
How many farmers did you have involved in that project?
So in the early days of the project, which was kind of, we talked about it for maybe 18 months, 2 years, and then we actually got a sort of a small pilot off the ground about 3 years ago. And that was just, it was kind of started by myself and Jonathan Heath, who was actually surveying in the Clapham project. We sort of came together and we talked to the Malhamdale Environment Group, of which he was a part of at the time and I wasn't. And we managed to just get a few people together who were interested in waders and curlews. And there was maybe 3 farms at the time. We started in a very low-key, low-impact kind of way, because we were just sort of trying to find our way through what was required in terms of the scientific process. So it started off really small and really contained in a manageable way that volunteers could cope with and we could cope with.
Yeah, because it was all volunteer led at that point.
Yeah, and it still is actually. It still is.
Yeah. So what are you up to now? Did you say 13 before?
Yeah, so I think we've got maybe 13, maybe possibly 15, another 2 coming on board. Which has been absolutely amazing, and that has been a very organic process of, you know, farmers getting involved, and their involvement is, in some ways, most instances, it's about just allowing us to go onto the land and accepting that we're there. And quite often there are public footpaths or open access land, but we really want the farmers to be engaged and to actively say, yeah, we welcome you here because we want to know what these birds are doing. And actually, my experience of curlews is that they bring everyone together. All of the differences mostly get set aside, from gamekeeping to farming to environmental bodies to volunteers. Everybody is willing to put a lot of things aside to get the best outcomes for this bird.
Yeah. So that's really grown, that, hasn't it, over the course of the project, the amount of people that have been involved with it. What sorts of things have you seen then from the reports that your ornithologist has done and that kind of thing?
I think it's very early days for us. We're only 3 years in, so I think it's really hard to see any pattern. What I think is apparent is that the extremities of the weather, actually the last 2 years, a very late winter last year, a very warm, quick, drought-led spring this year, both impact on ground nesting birds. And curlew have very specific feeding needs. You know, they've got really long beats. They need it to be wet to get into the ground. I think we've seen birds disappear to places where maybe they're used to something a bit wetter. They've gone higher up to try and find wetland to feed during the nesting season. Last year, the cold late winter maybe delayed things a bit. But yeah, on the whole, I'd say generally it's too early for us to say, but we are already seeing that the weather has an impact. And actually this year's results would suggest that the warmth actually did them a lot of favours. And we had good results. And obviously we follow a scientific methodology for survey. So we have 5 visits, and it's all, I suppose, it has parameters that we have to meet to make sure we do it as scientifically as possible. But yeah, we don't always see chicks. And quite often we feel very, very lucky to see chicks. But actually this year, lots of our volunteers saw chicks.
Ah, brilliant.
And saw them late,
Yeah.
which is the thing we're looking for. If curlews are still here into mid-July and they're doing all of that protective behaviour, distraction techniques, it means there's something worth protecting, that the chicks are still here. So we saw that this year more than last year. So it led us to feel extremely positive that some of our birds did get chicks off the ground, which is the ultimate goal we're looking for.
Yeah, that's amazing. So with this data that you're collecting and the reports that are being written, what is your sort of, if you could wave a magic wand, what is the end game for that? Are you looking to come up with, I suppose, advisory notes for farming practices? What are you hoping will come out of this work, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. I think in the early days, what we were hoping for was engagement in our local community and our farming community, both from non-farmers and farmers, to create an awareness that not everything is what it seems. We hear the curlews, we look forward to them coming back. We're disappointed when they go because it's the start of spring and the end of summer almost. But so we were looking for awareness and engagement and people to know that things weren't right. That's probably changed now to wanting to know about chick productivity. Are the birds here successful? And if they're not successful, if they're disappearing in June because they haven't been successful, because they do mostly just go back to the coast or make their way back to the coast, why aren't they successful? What was the thing that sort of determined that they weren't successful? Was it predation? And we have to remember that ground nesting birds, as long as ground nesting birds have existed and predators have existed, they have been predated. That's why they have 4 chicks. So, we have to be open-minded about predation, but it is an issue. And in some areas, the burden of predation is now great. So was it predation? Was it a farming practice where maybe there was an early mowing and the nest was, the bird was flushed from the nest and just thought this isn't a safe place, or mown? So there can be multiple factors for failure, and we don't always know why. So maybe working out what some of the failures are and what they mean. I think I also felt strongly that if we were going to have this information, it was an information data set that needed to be available to farmers to help inform them, whether that is land management practice, if they did want to make some changes, or if they did want to consider ground nesting birds, but also that if going forward there's going to be some sort of environmental payment, if curlew are going to be a conservation priority for Fair Natural England, I would want farmers to be able to have that information so they can access funding if that's something they want to do. So I felt that was really important as well.
Yeah, it is important to look forward to what might be coming, because farming at the minute is just so up in the air, isn't it? We don't know what schemes and stuff are coming, but you would imagine there's going to be emphasis placed on this sort of thing, and quite rightly. What sort of engagement? So you've obviously got 13 farmers that have been involved with the project and have given you access to the land. What has the sort of feedback been from other farmers that you've got in front of? I can't imagine anybody's not bothered about these birds, but where do you see sort of the disconnect sometimes, I suppose?
It's difficult, I think, and I always feel a bit, what's the word, reticent to talk about it, because I don't want anybody to feel the burden of blame in this. I think, I didn't originally come from a farming background, but Neil does, and his family have farmed here for decades and have been in Malhamdale since about 1900. And I think everybody, to some degree, the Second World War was a huge game changer. And it almost determined the path of the industrialization of the landscape and of farming. And mostly what people have followed the direction of travel that government have laid out. And certainly when I met Neil, he had hundreds and hundreds of sheep. The land was overgrazed. But the payment schemes were in place at the time, the schemes that were in place were kind of encouraging lots of stock to be around.
Yep.
And then within probably a year of being together, there was pilot studies to decrease the levels of stock significantly, because they realised that, say here in Malhamdale on very fragile limestone grassland, we were losing really huge amounts of botanical species. So there was a push to say, right, we've got to work quickly to try and reverse this. And that was probably our change as a farm. That was our change of like, right, well, things are going to end up being differently. And we started with outwintered native breed belted Galloways. And it was really transformative for us as a farm in terms of what we saw on the ground and the farm income as well, the profitability of the farm. But I am always reticent to, I think, blame's the wrong word because it's too strong, but point the finger at anyone, because I think mostly people have tried to follow the government directive of food production. I think we're getting to a place now where it used to feel like it was one or the other. You were either nature or you were farming and food production. Now I don't think it feels like that. I mean, it doesn't have to be like that. And I think the two actually symbiotically work together. And it's really hard to work against nature to have food production. It ends up being quite expensive. So we found that out to our peril, really. We were buying huge amounts of concentrates and spending loads and loads of money on stuff that didn't actually increase our income from a sheep perspective. And in the meantime, we were sort of overgrazing and the land had been drained a bit. And the things that were done then were certainly not in favour of ground nesting birds and curlews. But I think to have an awareness about what's happening on your farm, and that if you love the birds and if you start thinking, even if your farming system stays the same and you want to make it work for the curlew, for the ground nesting birds, in amongst your system, there are ways of trying to do that. And I think it starts with this is where they are, this is where they're nesting, this is when they're nesting. What do you want? You know, we don't go to farmers and say, you must do this, or do you want to do this? We just give the information. We say we're here, we're watching them, they know that, but we just say, here's the information. And, you know, we have Neil comes to our curlew meeting that we have in sort of April to refresh all of our volunteers. Another farmer comes too. He's really interested in what's happening in, you know, on his farm and also what we're doing, and has been supportive of that. And others may not want to come, and that's absolutely fine. But they are, if they see us out on the land, they'll maybe have a chat. And we'll give them a report at the end of the season.
I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head there, Lee. Like, any type of conservation, it is not about blame. That's not the point, is it, at all? You explained that brilliantly about, you know, where farming's been and where it's going and where, you know, all that kind of thing. It's about, you know, the curlew or anything else in the ecosystem is a measure of ecosystem functioning, isn't it? And when you are farming in a place like the Yorkshire Dales, that's got to be in balance, and it's to your benefit if it is. You know, you can reduce your inputs. We've done episodes on this podcast about mob grazing and soil health, and that's a very similar thing. All right, we're not talking about curlews, but we're talking about soil ecosystems and that kind of thing. And when all that's working, it's better for profitability, it's better for farming.
It is, and it is all linked, and it's all linked to curlews, because fundamentally, if you have good soil health, you have tons and tons of things that live in the soil, and then there's food for them and food for the chicks. Farms are essentially, whether we like it or not, farms are also habitats for birds like the curlew and the lapwing. And we also, as well as curlew, while we're monitoring curlew, we're also looking at other waders within the territories. So we're actually, you know, surveying all the waders really. But they are habitats, and they have their place in the landscape and have done for probably thousands of years. You know, I'm not a bird expert. I don't know how long they've been in the uplands really, but they have a place here. And going back to on an emotional level, farmers connect with them massively, connect with them hugely. And One of the farmers recently said to one of the volunteers in the group that he sort of asked how many pairs there were, and he was told, and he said he felt quite sad about that because there were so few in comparison to how many there were when he was young.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's lots of reasons. There's lots of reasons behind that. But, you know, we have an opportunity here, I think, in each of our individual dales to try and come together to make a positive change for curlew and other waders and other ground nesting birds. Jonathan just sent us something yesterday, which I thought was really good, actually. He just said something about the community. And I think the FiPL thing is 4 pillars. One of them is people.
Absolutely.
And I think the community really does value being able to be involved with something like this, and that they almost take ownership to some degree. They have a snapshot into being involved in the curlew. It comes for 4 months. And while it's here, they're part of the ability to make a positive change. And I think local people who live here value that. The non-farmers. Because otherwise, I think they feel like they have no agency in it.
They've got no control over it.
And I think they're very aware that that the northern uplands as a whole are very much a stronghold. They've seen, or they've read the books, and they now know that further south they are firefighting now with curlew. Whereas we still have the visible birds here.
Do you have anything to say about schools, Lee? Do you do anything in schools?
I don't at the moment, but we did with our primary school. So with Kirby Mallam Primary School, our daughter's just left there, but when she was in year 4, we had a fantastic tie-up between, there was Sarah Smith from the Clapham Curlew cluster, with me over here, Ellen Bradley, who was working for Curlew Action at the time, and an artist, a felt making artist. But basically we had 2 farm visits, and we had one with Kirby Mallam Primary School and one with Settle Primary School, who were in the same federation, and we did a visit with them on the farm where they drew, they collected information, they were asked to think about the landscape and being a curlew in the landscape and what that would be like. And if you were a curlew, what would you need to survive and thrive? And it was brilliant. The kids loved it. They were like absolutely mad for it. And then when they got back to school, both Ellen Bradley and Sarah and the artist whose name did felt making with them. They did curlew awareness posters, they wrote poetry, and it became an exhibition, and it was exhibited in Kirby Mallam Church, in Nidderdale, in the Folly at Settle, and then other artists became part of it as well. It became a bigger exhibition in some locations with other artists who were interested in curlews. But for the kids, it was just a really, I don't know, it was amazing to watch them, how quickly they understood the pressures that the bird faces and how much they suddenly, without maybe some of them not even knowing what curlews really were, to loving this bird and like suddenly understanding that it faced these huge pressures and that we have responsibility for that in some way. So that was amazing. That was a really good project.
It is amazing how the curlew like draws people in, isn't it? My kids were exactly the same. They were born in Shropshire, grew up there for the first sort of 4 or 5 years, and we moved back up here last year, as I said. And that night that I heard the curlew, I said to them both, I said, can you hear that? Can you hear that? And they heard it once, and then every time they heard it after that, they were like, Mum, curlew! Like, it's just amazing, isn't it? And they'd never come across, because as you said, they're struggling in Shropshire with them, so they'd never come across it. But yeah, it is such a fantastic bird. What's next then for this project? Where do you want it to go?
Good question, really. I think it's like more data. We need to keep going year on year. And I think that's going to be the challenge for us, is the funding to keep Kieran, our ornithologist, because he really, really professionalised it. We don't have the backing of any big environmental charity or group. So we are really like a community, volunteer, local people led project, and we kind of have to support ourselves with that. We very kindly got funding this year from Yorkshire Dales Millennium Trust.
Brilliant.
I got a grant from them to keep Kieran, and he really does professionalise our process and maps out our territories, and it just makes it scientific. And I think to do it, to keep going with it, keep our volunteers engaged who gladly give their time for this bird and invest in its future in Malhamdale. And I think to keep going with that and to be able to keep presenting information about what the birds are doing, their pressure points in the landscape, whether it's predation, farming, whatever, and also then to keep giving the information to land owners, managers, farmers who can use it.
Brilliant.
And just to keep the awareness up that things aren't all right yet.
Yeah.
And maybe there'll come a time when things are all right, where their chick productivity goes up enough for them to be a sustainable population again.
Yeah.
But at the minute that we're not there. Even though we see them, we're not there. So I think we need to just keep going. And I think what I'd love is the financial pressure to keep Kieran on board, to keep an ornithologist on board with us, is who's going to have the pots of money to fund something like that?
Yeah.
Where's that going to come from? And I'd maybe love some nice companies to come involved and say,
private equity.
Can somebody match fund it?
Yeah.
You know, something like that, just to support a community group that's, I don't know, trying to do some good to help this iconic species, which is now red listed, and we can't afford to lose it.
So this second pair are familiar voices. We've got Jamie McEwen and Catherine Bryan from Kingsdale Head. Kingsdale Head was the 2024 National Park Nature Award winner. And on a previous episode, we spoke to Catherine and Jamie about some of the audits and surveys they've done on the site. That was actually part of a much bigger land recovery project. So let's hear what they've got to say about that.
So I'm Jamie McEwen. I'm the Conservation and Farm Manager at Kingsdale Head. So essentially I'm responsible for delivering the FiPL project and everything else that happens at Kingsdale Head.
And I'm Catherine Bryan, and my husband Tim and I bought Kingsdale Head 5.5 years ago. And our intention was to regenerate a landscape, bring in a more diverse set of species across the landscape.
So we've heard from you both on a previous episode about the various surveys and audits and baselining work that you've done on the site here at Kingsdale, but that was sort of almost a lead-in, wasn't it, to a bigger sort of conservation landscape recovery piece. Do you want to just talk us through that?
So we've done some baseline surveys, but I suppose we wanted to pull it together in a more cohesive picture. And also we knew that going forward, in terms of the financial sustainability, we needed to be able to bring in revenue from more, if you like, conservation type revenue streams. And so the FiPL funding gave us the opportunity to work with a consultant to really pull together a full overview of the site, including some of the monitoring we'd already done, plus some additional.
And I guess it was trying to pull, and this is always the challenge, I suppose, of biodiversity, is trying to pull together all of those bits of information and get a picture of what that means for the site.
And part of that is also trying to get natural processes to work more effectively. Yeah. And the consultant we were working with, I suppose, was looking at things not just about populations, but also connectivity across the landscape, variability within the landscape. So I suppose feeding in some slightly more complex measurements. And that's something we can review periodically as our work proceeds.
Yeah. And it's really interesting you said that. I was literally speaking to another farmer this morning about this. It's all right counting specific populations of specific species, but if exactly as you said, if the connectivity is not there or it's out, the ecosystem's out of balance, it's kind of irrelevant, isn't it? It doesn't...
It's not sustainable over the long term.
No.
The grazing regime for us is key. It's one of the key disruptors in the whole system. How you graze a site is one of your levers to get more diversity into the system. We knew that grazing cattle was really important. And so actually that was another reason why we accessed FiPL, to receive a grant that then enabled us to receive a revenue stream around conservation grazing.
Mm-hmm.
So this is one of the revenue streams we expect to continue, because we expect the outcomes of that grazing to be really positive for the site. And Jamie did a huge amount of work on understanding the right grazing levels and putting that to the national park.
So the FiPL project let us look at the site more holistically, I suppose, the whole site, and with a better understanding of the habitats there, we could design a grazing plan that made use of open valleys, limestone influence,
Mm-hmm.
grasslands and heathlands and things, places where the cattle could have a really positive impact without having that negative impact on the peatlands.
Mm-hmm.
We used no fence collars to monitor where the cattle were going as much as to control where they were going. Actually, on a big site like ours, it was as much about having the information about where they were. And we used that data then actually to overlay it with some of our habitat data that was collected. It gives a really good bit of information then about how our cows are behaving over 2 years of grazing on the site. That was part of our FiPL project as well, was to report on some of that, as well as some vegetation monitoring that we're doing alongside it on the peatlands. And we've seen some great improvements in the vegetation in the peatlands as well, alongside it. But we've also used all that information to then inform the grazing for the site as we've gone on. And then as we're looking now at working with some of our neighbours and through the landscape recovery scheme, using some of that information then to inform wider grazing plans for the whole project. So really good to have the opportunity to collect the information as well as to use it now.
I think one of the nice things is we were working. Helen Keep was, one of our key contacts at the national park, and she's known this farm for many, many more years than we have. So she was the person that supported a lot of the work we've been doing and came to do the site visits. And it was really interesting getting her reflection on the changes she was seeing, because she was comparing it with a much longer timeline than we'd seen.
Amazing. Just going back to no fence collars, for anybody that doesn't know what they are, can you just give us an explanation of them?
They were pretty new, I think, when we started using them through the FiPL project. They're a GPS collar that allows you to control where the cattle go through a small shock. So you can control that through your phone or online and sort of set boundaries and use those collars to manage cows around the boundaries. But just having that GPS information was useful for us as well.
It's like a virtual electric. And the fact this is the ideal setup for them, isn't it? You want them on this type of
I think when you've got few cows and big areas, a fence becomes a much more expensive thing than so that makes sense. It was a complicated thing for us in some ways to try and fit it into a scheme. We did they were fairly new at the time, and I think naturally they weren't so comfortable with no fence collars yet. We did a standard operating procedure with our vet and had that sort of signed off through them to try and just give some confidence in the way that we were using them there. And the welfare implications and things, which are all really well thought through, and our experience of them has been pretty good. It's
brilliant. And again, that experience is fed directly into the landscape recovery project, the Three Dales project that we work with Yorkshire Wildlife Trust on, and no fence collars will be used much more widely in that project. So I think it's been really helpful to have had that experience, and we'll certainly be continuing to use them. I mean, as Jamie said, it's a combination of some season, making sure we can limit them seasonally to where we need to, but also collecting really key information on where they're grazing.
Was there were you surprised with where they were ending up? Did you?
Yeah, a lot of it was actually about proving what we thought we knew. I suppose we've got, like I say, we've got big parcels, but we've got a bit more of a complex of vegetation than just blanket bog, and the cows were using the areas that we thought they'd use. They're using steeper slopes and drier areas and the better grazing, I suppose, and they're not using the blanket bog particularly. So it's stuff that we'd seen on site, I suppose, and lots of people would probably understand from grazing a hill, but I guess having that information really confirms it, and being able to overlay it with previous habitat data as well, and just really show what we thought we knew, I suppose. So not too many surprises, really.
Catherine, will you just tell us a bit more? You mentioned a project then with the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. Will you just talk a little bit more about that for us and what that involves?
So given the new environmental land management system structure. The top level is landscape recovery. So Yorkshire Wildlife Trust are coordinating the Three Dells project, which is one of the round one pilots. And that is working with 8 landowners across 4,500 hectares for a really ambitious project to improve biodiversity in the uplands. It's across 3 dales, as the name suggests. And I think, as I said, for us, the great thing was, I think the work Jamie had done on grazing pressures and getting the right grazing level. The information we've had from the no fence collars has all really helped feed into that project and help inform how the grazing, how we've worked with Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, and we've come up with, or they've come up then with, I suppose, a framework for grazing across a much wider area, particularly on the upland components.
So landscape recovery, that phrase has come up quite a lot. What does that, in its essence, on a commercial farm, which obviously a lot of farms are in the Yorkshire Dales, everybody's there, farmer first. What does landscape recovery mean to you guys? What is like the definition of that for you two?
I suppose in this case we're talking about a specific scheme, which is called landscape recovery. But I suppose it, for us it's the opportunity to work at the scale that we maybe need for some of them. This is quite a species focused project. And although we're quite a big site, 608 hectares here, there's a real need for scale with some of the stuff that we're talking about. And I think that's the opportunity there to work at sort of nature scale, I suppose. Maybe see the recovery of some of those species that we're focused on, things like curlew, black grouse, meadows, and things like that.
And I think the interesting thing is within that, our landscape recovery, there are very different profiles of owners. We've got tenant farmers, state, obviously an NGO, with Yorkshire Wildlife Trust ourselves. All as owners, we have slightly different objectives. We do have different objectives about what we're trying to achieve. But I think the important thing is being able to understand common goals. And then adapt each person's farming model to achieve those goals. So the sorts of things we'll be doing here will be a bit different from what some other owners are doing. But those who, are currently farming sheep will be adjusting grazing levels. Some will be taking sheep off. Some may be considering putting cattle on. And so we understand that everybody's in a slightly different position. And therefore, the solutions on everybody's landholding will be slightly different. But it is trying to keep that wider objective about what we're trying to achieve across that 4,500 hectares. And the key outcomes we need in terms of whether it's more trees or some more scrub or restored peatlands, what we need to really get that wider impact across the landscape.
And it sounds, from what I've heard from you both this afternoon, it sounds very much like FiPL grants allow, exactly as you said, for that bit of a more holistic view. They're not quite as prescriptive. And actually, as you said, Catherine, every farm is different, isn't it? And it is about that overall objective. How you get there can be slightly different, can't it? And it does seem to me, correct me if I'm wrong, that the FiPL grant allows for that flex a little bit.
Yeah, that seems to have been the case. Like you say, we came across some of these problems in the conventional agri-environment schemes, and so being able to approach it in the way that we'd hoped has made a big difference.
And I think it is being able to work at that landscape scale rather than at the field parcel scale. And I think it's still one of my big frustrations. And I can see why administratively it may make sense, but chopping everything up into field parcels when you're trying to look at wider conservation outcomes is not helpful.
It's got to be on that bigger scale. If we hop back to your audits then, so you've got your baseline, when will you go back and remeasure? What's like the guidance around that?
We're always measuring here. So we've been doing sort of vegetation surveys annually on our peatlands, and there's a whole other set of monitoring that we do on our blanket bogs and peatlands as well to look at condition. But yeah, it's a big site and resources are challenge. I suppose you can't just survey everything every time. So some of those things, and things change slowly and as well. So,
Yes.
Some of those things will be more on a rolling basis. So think for our bird surveys, for example, I think we will maybe leave longer gaps for some of those to see some change. We've done our pollinator surveys on a bit more of a regular basis, and we're starting to see some really positive results from that as well. So, yeah, it's a rolling thing, but I think there will be a convenient point, I think, to bring all that back together again the same way we did at FiPL, and see if we can get an overall picture of how the site's changing as opposed to these kind of individual metrics.
Yeah. And I think, as part of the landscape recovery plan, there's a very detailed monitoring plan in that across the whole 4,500 hectares. And so that will be very structured, and will feed in, the data that we have. But part of that is also so that people who are participants in that may be able to access revenue streams from things like carbon credit markets, biodiversity credit markets. So that's something quite new for farmers. Whether it will really work at scale in terms of the amount of funding coming in through that process, I think that's still not proven. But monitoring is essential to that too.
It is, yeah.
It's fundamental. You can't achieve the incomes without really good monitoring frameworks in place. I should also give a shout out to the Woodland Trust who have helped us and supported us in lots of different ways, but one of them has been in some of the survey work we've done too.
And you said that the Yorkshire Dales National Park have been quite instrumental in the monitoring of what you were doing with the FiPL Grant Helen Keep and the ladies at the National Park.
Yeah, I think because we wanted to do something a little bit different, it did take a wee bit of understanding of the site, which having a local person with an understanding of the site, and Helen's got more experience of the site than we did in some ways, doing it for so long. Having that kind of perspective on the site was really useful. And then obviously once we got into delivery, somebody coming out to see it and monitor it that understood what we're trying to achieve as well was it's a good thing. So yeah.
It was actually just really nice to get their feedback because again, they could see the changes that we were seeing. So I think being able to share that and share the learnings from that has been a really nice part of the whole FiPL funding programme.
So the final guest that we've got on this episode is Paul Hunter from West Witton. Paul's been one of the volunteers involved with quite a big National Parks curlew project. So let's hear what he's got to say about that.
I'm Paul Hunter. I farm Beacon Fields in West Witton. It's a small, mainly sheep farm in the Yorkshire Dales. We run about 200 hours, just less, and work off farm as much as on it, sadly. The National Park sent a letter out some years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago now.
Yeah.
Does anyone have curlews on their farm, and would you be interested in a project to help them? That is kind of my thing. And I just had an allotment, a steep allotment up there, turned down from being in the Wader section of stewardship because it was too steep for them to nest.
Yep.
And I thought, well, no one's told our curlews because that's
there.
Where they nest. So I kind of had almost a point to prove in a way with that. And my uncle farms next door to me, and he's a very traditional Dales farmer, and he was interested as well. So we both of us went into the scheme. He went in, the first intake year I wasn't involved, and he was, and then the second intake year they had more money to throw at kit, so they involved more farmers.
Yep.
So at that point we had some curlews caught and tagged, and a nest or two fenced in to protect them and monitored and so on at that point.
Okay. So tell me why then. Why are you bothered about these curlews?
Well, I didn't realise they were rare until I read it in newspapers and so on, because I've had jobs that have covered the whole of the UK, but having been born and brought up in West Witton, it's not riddled with curlews, but there are many curlews in West Witton, and so and I'm quite kind of nature, not driven, but I like to see nature on our farm. That's I don't think many people are in farming just to make a fortune. No. It's part of our thing. So if it was something we could do to help them and not be the generation that lost all the nature value, then that was the thing I was interested in.
Yeah. I was saying to Lee when I spoke to her yesterday about the Mallandale project, the sound of the curlew. I lived away for a long time, and when I came home last summer, the sound of the curlew is the sound of the dales for me. Like it's something that you're used to hearing, isn't it? So I get what you're saying. You maybe don't realise that they are red listed, aren't they? And although we still hear them, there's obviously not as many about as
well. Apparently, they live a very long time, so they'll live maybe 25 years or so.
Yeah.
So, but they don't have much success in getting chicks off. So the population, it is believed, is quite an elderly population of curlews, and we could be at the point where over the next 10 years they really, really decline because the younger birds aren't coming through into the population.
Yeah.
This is all information I've been told.
Yes. Through the project.
Yeah, exactly. So it kind of sharpens your thinking about it.
Yeah.
If you think, as a farmer, you're used to having your flock of sheep or whatever, and you don't want all your sheep to be old because you're going to have more problems, and you're not going to have the replacements coming through. So you've got a bigger problem coming on the horizon when you suddenly have to go and find them. And if there's a population of sheep you can go and buy from, but there isn't a population of curlews, so you can go and do that. So that if they're gone, they're gone.
Yeah.
So along with me point to prove about they do nest on slopes, it was just literally, that would be a nice thing to help.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like it was going to take a lot of my time or effort. So it was a case of let some experts have access to your land, which ideal.
Yeah. So do you know how many farmers are involved in it in total?
Not off the top of my head, but into the teens anyway.
Yeah. Brilliant. So there's quite a lot of people engaged with it then, which is good.
I think we're about the furthest east. We're about as far east as you can get in the national park, and then you drop down into the lowlands there. And then they go right across, as you say, Malham and above Hawes and so on.
Yeah.
So they've been tagged and tracked, and we have a little app that's a little bit flaky, but you can see where your curlews go.
Brilliant.
In winter.
Where do they go?
One goes to Galway on the Irish coast. I haven't been able to get an exchange visit yet. And one goes to the army ranges, or just by the army ranges, on some quite intensive dairy farm for winter. Because I think the soil there will be more open. They can do the wading thing as though it's an estuary.
Yeah.
So one stays at home and one goes across to the far
across
side
to
of
Ireland.
Yeah.
Nice.
West coast of Ireland. And apparently a lot of the curlews that winter in and around the Dales are actually Scandinavian curlews that arrive for winter and then go back there for summer.
Yeah.
So this is why they wanted to tag them particularly, because you could get a false impression of the population as migrants come and go.
Yeah. Fascinating. So tagging them. What else have you've got loads of interesting stuff in front of you. What else have they been doing with them?
We had a wader calendar form every week. Make either on your rounds round your farm or make half an hour to do it. Go to the particular area that we were surveying. So in this case, it's what I call the low pasture.
Yep.
Probably every farm in the Dales has
got a low pasture. Yep.
And count the wader species that were present and make any notes as you see fit. Whether they were displaying, as in still trying to attract a mate, or whether they were alarming, which is a sign that they had young.
Yeah.
So we did that and submitted that all to the BTO, and they've written the project up now. Now that is a weighty tome that takes some getting through because it's very scientific. I haven't read it all, but they've collated all this data that farmers have gathered. I think part of the survey was to prove that farmers can gather that information for them and do have that knowledge of where birds are on their farm and what habitat suit them and
yeah,
so on.
Yeah, in a really simple way. Like there's nothing complicated about that. Like you can see when they've hatched, can't you? Your curlews, 15th of May, they've started trying to chase you away.
Yeah.
And your lapwings and your oyster catchers, they're obviously going somewhere else after April.
I don't know if they ever got a nest off that year,
right?
In particular, but they tend to, they have a bigger territory than a curlew, so they could have been nesting like
way
over kind of thing. But yeah, it's as simple as the switch on the 15th of May, don't they?
Yeah, yeah.
And go into that.
Chicks are out.
Yeah, and that's like your critical time for a lot of farming operations, and you're into early silage, and we don't take hay until kind of into July, but you're closing meadows up, you might be muck spreading or harrowing or whatever. So there's that. There's been a lot of education of farmers in the scheme about awareness around that. There's been gamekeepers involved and BTO people involved to sort of mark nests so that farmers can avoid them with the tractors and so on. We haven't had that problem because ours, for whatever reason, tend to nest in pastures rather than meadows.
Yeah.
So we've had them fenced off more from a predator control point of view.
Okay. Yeah.
We had one nest this spring it had a trail cam, but it didn't have a fence around it just yet. They hadn't got round to getting the electric fence around that nest. And I have a picture of badger coming and eating all the chicks, and that was that. All the eggs rather, and that was that. Finished. Another nest further up Pen Hill lost 2 clutches of eggs, and the guy from the BTO said that'll probably, like, it's quite late in the year, they probably won't go again, but we'll if they do, we'll fence it in. We'll try because they're trying. Yeah. And they got a 3rd clutch and got a chick fledged from that 3rd clutch, which was fantastic. Yeah. Result for those guys that put in all the effort. All I do is ride around on a bike and tick little boxes. it takes me no time. It's just part of your sort of checking around the stock anyway, kind of thing. Yeah.
And taking notice, isn't it? Because it's so easy to drive around stock and be busy as a farmer and not, I suppose, not noticing stuff.
You very take it for granted where we are and how lucky we are. A lot of time. It has kind of brought home to me that aspect of it, and I've learned a bit more detail about how these birds behave and how they go on. So it's been really interesting.
Yeah. So what other sorts of predator issues have this as a project seen?
We've had predation by stoats, carrion crows, and badgers. The report also mentions foxes to an extent. There's a lot of nest disturbance rather than a predator actually coming.
Yes.
Like people with dogs off leads.
Yeah, flushing them off.
People with dogs on quite long leads. And that can be as harmful as a predator actually eating the eggs. If the eggs go cold, they're done anyway. Yeah, yeah. So that would be the main sort of. Badgers, obviously, gamekeepers can't touch them; they're protected. But the stoats, the foxes, and the carrion crows, the gamekeepers have been trying to control their numbers to try and give the birds a chance. We've put a lot of signs up on footpaths and so on. Yeah, to try and get people to follow the rules.
That was what that was going to be my next question. So in terms of public outreach, because obviously Lee quite rightly said this is not about pointing the finger of blame at anybody, is it? It's about figuring out what is going on with these birds and what can we all do.
It's a little bit like the farmers getting the nests marked by someone that knows a bit more about it, and then the farmer can do his operations around. Yeah. It's just education of people, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And just saying, it's not just because we don't like seeing dogs run around.
No.
Please, can you just...
it's for the birds as well as the livestock, and so what has there been any... So obviously the farmers have been involved in access of land and doing these surveys. In terms of getting the local community, the non-farming community involved, has there been any of that? Has any...
The National Park have done quite a bit with their social media channels. I've put bits on the village Facebook group because it's nice to not just be really the only involvement I have with that is checking that sheep aren't in someone's garden.
Yeah.
It's nice to actually have something positive. So yeah, I think that's where farmers aren't brilliant at that, are they? We don't. If we're interacting with the public, we're moaning about something.
Yeah, it can be hard, can't it? It can be hard to know where to go because you can never please everybody for a start. And I think actually we're at a stage in agriculture sometimes where we're worried about speaking to the general public for in case we say something that we shouldn't do or that might be taken the wrong way or whatever. So I understand that. Yeah, I do understand that. But I mean, the local community will hear the birds as much as the farmers do. So Lee was saying that, you know, the people up in the people in Mallandale that weren't farming but were involved with the project just were mad for it, absolutely wanted to be involved with it because they wanted to protect them, and it almost brought that community a bit closer together, I think, by the sounds of things. But at least when you're doing a big project like this and you've got the data and you've got a scientist bringing the data together into a proper, you know, reviewed report, there's no room for opinion, really, is there? Like, it is what it is. Yeah,
exactly. So you have this trail cam evidence that it was a stoat that ate those chicks, or it was whatever that happened. It's not. Oh, I think, and it's not a gamekeeper. It's not anyone with a vested interest. No. It's a scientifically peer reviewed.
Yep.
That's just how it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what they need going forward.
Yeah.
They need it quite quick.
Yes, I know. Yeah. Yeah, that is the trouble, isn't it? We were talking about the situation sort of down in Shropshire, which is where I actually lived before we moved back home, and they're firefighting down there now, and it would just be such a terrible shame, wouldn't it, to get to that stage up here.
Absolutely. So the audio moth was a listening device that we took to a strategic point on the farm where there was a lot of birds, and just left it there. It's weatherproof and so on, relatively, and just left it there all summer. Then collected it, and it must have a memory card in it, and you feed it back through some software in the computer that tells them what birds are present. Yeah. So all the kind of the more elusive ones are noticed as well.
Yes.
But again, I think it's just that fact. It can't be tampered with. I could tick whatever boxes in honesty or dishonesty on that calendar as I saw fit. But if they've heard it, it's there.
It's there, yeah.
So I think it's part of that getting data from a number of sources so you can verify, I guess proving that the farmers are getting the information right, seeing the right things.
Yeah.
So that was
so they just put that in the trees, did they? They just strap that up somewhere?
Well, there isn't any trees up right near there, and a lot of waders don't nest near trees because trees are where predators hide.
I found that out yesterday.
Yeah,
I was oblivious to that.
So they have a buffer zone, and then they'll start nesting. So we're quite, apart from dry stone walls, we're quite open pastures up further up the fell, up the hill. So we tied it to a fence post. Tied one to a fence post that I don't know whether there'd ever been a fence there. I think it had been around some old mine workings originally, and walled one into a wall. Just took a few stones off and put it facing the right way and walled it back in again. Only maybe a matchbox size piece of kit.
Yeah.
So we had those in. We've used that. That's all. I believe they were funded by FiPL. We had trail cams. Again, watching the nests to see what, and then I'll find you some pictures when we're finished. But some quite elaborate electric fences round nests, which were solar powered, and which were they're quite expensive bits of kit. So I would think that's FiPL money as well.
Yeah.
And people who were trained to put them up. I think the training's more to do with not disturbing the birds than how to put a fence up. But there'll be 5 strands of electric up to so high to stop sheep going in.
Yes.
And down to ground level to stop, or try to stop stoats going.
Yes.
They seem to be very successful. My worry was that it would just signposts to crows and
Yeah.
buzzards and so on where a nest was, but they didn't seem to cotton on
No.
to that extent.
Yeah.
So that was another part of the money, and that was pretty successful. The nests that were fenced in were the ones that got chicks.
Yeah, brilliant. And that's not. I know you said the kit. Obviously, it was quite elaborate kit, but in terms of fencing around a nest, you wouldn't have to fence. It's not. You're not taking big patches of fields out. Are you literally just?
It was like somewhere between 5 and 10 meters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Somewhere there.
Yeah.
And for the duration of incubation, so for maybe a month.
Yeah.
And then opened it up, and this year sheep was straight into it because all the other grass
was it
at that point.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it made no significant difference.
No.
To us at all.
Brilliant.
Yeah, it was the easiest way to help. And the kit's quite complicated, but it's complicated kit so that it's easy to use.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
Yes. Okay.
So it was obviously being solar powered. There's no maintenance needed.
No.
Just as I rode past, I checked that it wasn't shorting out on the ground and it didn't need anything.
Yeah.
That was it.